Can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, hi, I'm Stephan, and I'd like to thank Alice and Tom for inviting me to the meeting to talk about the new integrations for the citation file format, or CFF in short. For those of you who haven't heard about CFF, it's a community format that's been developed since 2017 by members of the Research Software Sustainability and the RSE communities, which is research software engineers. The project is currently co-led by myself and by Jurian Sparks, who you may know. He's from the Netherlands eSign Center. And a bit of history. So CFF was initiated as an iteration on plain text citation files that provide citation information for software to make them machine readable, because we thought that would be a good idea and they would make the information more usable. CFF files are called citation.cff, and the format itself is implemented in YAML, and it has a clear focus on citation use cases only. So this means that it mainly supports the case where someone wants to cite a software they use in their research, but it also aims to support more advanced cases, such as when you want to make software as the valid research output that it is to be more like papers, and papers are what people already know. Then in CFF, you can provide, for example, a list of references to prior work, such as dependencies and other papers and theoretical work that the software builds on. We've recently released the very new version 1.2.0, and that also supports a new feature called preferred citation. And that lets you provide a reference to another work that users should cite in addition or instead of your software itself. And the reason behind this is that we want people to be able to get credit for their work now, while the practice of citing software directly has not yet fully permeated our research culture. So this focus on citation also means that CFF is meant to be used only by humans and also in the early stages of automated workflows, such as new integrations. And we think that after that, code meta should take over, and especially for recording and transporting more comprehensive software metadata that goes beyond pure citation metadata. So like I said, CFF uses YAML to make it easy for people, for human users, to read and manually write citation CFF files. But there's also a growing ecosystem of tools that can work with CFF files. We have a very simple initializer, several converters to different formats, including CodeMeta, BibTeX, etc., and validation tools as well. CFF is actively developed with support from my employer, the German Aerospace Center, and also the Netherlands eSign Center, and people from the CFF community. It's been used in projects such as the Research Software Directory, which is a CMS for research software, and ASCL also can generate CFF files. And of course, CFF is newly supported by bigger platforms such as GitHub and Zenodo, and the Zotero reference manager, which is what I'll talk about in a minute. Last but not least, I think it's important to stress that CFF is compatible with CodeMeta, and that there are also tools to convert between the two. So I'm currently actually in the process of updating the crosswalk, and I've gotten an open draft PR. So if somebody wants to give me feedback on that, that'd be great. So GitHub announced a few weeks ago that they now provide citation information repositories. And you can see a screenshot on the left-hand side of my slide here. And the way this works is that users create a citation.cff file and push that to their default branch on their GitHub repository. GitHub then detects the file and renders the citation information that is in the CFF file in their user interface. The information is always up to date with the CFF file in the commit that users are currently looking at. And this way they provide basic support for citing different versions of a code base. At the moment, you get two things, namely an APA-like citation string and BibTeX, and we're working on support for more styles based on the citation style language. So I've talked about this before. If a user actually provides a so-called preferred citation, for example, to a paper that describes their software, then the rendered information reflects that as well. So you get the preferred citation in the GitHub UI. And finally, you get a link to the citation CFF file itself in the repository. GitHub have also come up with a documentation page for the feature, And also when you create a new file called citation.cff, GitHub will give you an initial example of what this file may look like. And you can use that as a starting point for creating your citation.cff file. Under the hood, GitHub uses an open source Ruby gem called RubyCFF. That's developed mainly by Robert Haynes, who is head of research software engineering at the University of Manchester in the UK and also part of the CFF community. And I think that this new GitHub feature is great news for two things. It can do two things for us, I think. One, obviously, it makes it easier to find citation information for a software that you want to cite, even if that software isn't published with a PID or DOI as it should be. But it also, I think, sends a strong signal to the research software community, but also to the research community as a whole, that software citation is something to be taken seriously. So hopefully in the future, that'll help us to arrive at a better practice of software citation, at least in the long run. Now, the second integration I'd like to talk about is the Zenodo integration, and that's based on the GitHub integration. And the way Zenodo uses CFF files is that when you have such a file in your GitHub repo and you use the GitHub Zenodo integration, which is used to auto-publish GitHub releases, then the information from the CFF file in your repository will be used to fill in the metadata that Zenodo uses for registering a DOI. And this will hopefully make it easier for people to publish a software with correct metadata without having to go into Zenodo and kind of manually update the metadata every time they push a release. And hopefully that'll also help drive adoption for registering DOIs for software as well. For users that already automate this and are creating .zenodo.json files, this may mean that they don't have to do this anymore. So they don't have to, for example, convert from a source file like CFF or a code meta file to .zenodo.json any longer, but can use a CFF file instead. And this way they would get, two features for the price of one file. But not everything that can be represented as metadata in Zenodo is currently supported by CFF. We're working to change some of this. For example, the information for contributors that are not authors at the same time will be something that will probably come to CFF soon. And to complete the citation workflow puzzle that we have, Zotero, which is an open source reference manager, now also supports CFF. And the way this works is that when you click the import button in your browser that is provided by a Zotero connector, it's a browser plugin that Zotero provides, and you're looking at a GitHub repository that contains a citation.cff file, and then the connector will pick up the correct citation metadata from the file, and it'll end up in the main Zotero app, which is something you can see on the left-hand side. And there is a fallback for the Zotero connector, because if there is no CFF file, then it'll just go back to using the metadata that's provided by GitHub. Yes, conclusion, all in all, I think it's fair to say that these new integrations are something like an inverted moon landing for CFF, and that they bring a lot of changes to the format and a lot of work to us. But hopefully they're also a small step in the direction of better software citation practices. Some more about the future of CFF. Development continues. New tooling is also being developed. For example, Ruby CFF continues to be developed, and also we are working on a brand new user-friendly initialization and editing website for the citation file format. And in terms of CFF as a project, we want to establish more formal governance, because we think that's something that we really need now that the project is growing. And we want to set up a steering committee to that end to help with governing the project. And yeah, hopefully we'll see some new integration soon. I've just realized that there is an open issue for adding the CFF fields to bibliotex, and also adding CFF support to jabref, which is another reference manager. So hopefully we'll see some more of that down the road. And that's it for me. Thanks for listening. And I think I'm ready for questions.
Moritz has a question. He has his hand up.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting talk. I have a question. It's just more a practical question than a citation file format question. Mm-hmm. If I like the idea of the citation file format and to bring it in the GitHub repository, and also this this functionality to export it to Zenodo. I think this is really helpful for a lot of researchers that are not primarily doing software development. So I've been part in the Wikimedia Open Science fellowship program, and there we supported like 50 researchers from different fields, and many use GitHub and this Zenodo integration from all the disciplines that maybe do something with software but are not primarily focused on software development. Also for this research community, this is really a great help. However, for reproducible experiments, one somehow, or it would be great to have a link to the data, so that you can somehow link the data set that you also used to generate the results that you are then describing in your main paper. So what was the best practice until now is that you uploaded the file to the GitHub release or the data set. If it's not a very big data set, you can just upload it to the GitHub release, and then it is at least on GitHub but not on Zenodo. And there, I think it would be. I'm not sure if it's in the scope of the citation file format to describe that this experiment has been conducted with this software version and this dataset version, and that was the output dataset version. That would be something which would be really great if one could somehow describe it, but maybe that's more than a citation.
Yes, I'm not sure if that is actually in scope for the citation file format. We'll try to keep it really narrow in scope by just kind of catering towards the citation use cases. But I think that if your code relies on a specific data set to create an output, then this is a good use case for including the data set in the reference if it's published in the first place. Also, and that's just as a side note, we've been asked to support data sets with the citation file format as well, and we've run a very basic survey on whether that's actually possible, and we found that almost everything that we would possibly need for the most simple use cases is already there. So one thing that CFF version 1.2.0 does is introduce a new field called type that defaults to software. So if you don't put it in your CFF file, then it just assumes to be software. But you can also define it as being a data set by just putting in type data set. And there is talk about having that supported from, for example, the Google dataset search, so that information from GitHub is being picked up there and the dataset will be listed in Google dataset search, for example. And I think it can also be used to push datasets to Zenodo. I'm pretty sure that that's not something that's currently supported by Zenodo yet, because the feature is really, really new. So I think for the future, one way to go would be to have one repository for your software or for your code and one repository for the data set, and then push both to Zenodo to pick up the correct citation information and cross-reference them in the references section of the CFF file. I think that's one of the use cases I could see that could possibly work for that case that you describe.
Yeah, that's a very good outlook, and I think this is the complexity or the level of complexity that the average researcher can handle while still focusing on his main research. So it's really a great idea to also support data sets, even if it's not 100% the best format for that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. That's actually very helpful feedback, because personally, I was always thinking that it's really an experimental feature, and I'm not sure if people will use it very much, but yeah. And also in theory, I mean, there is a second way you could do this, is just to have a mixed repository that includes both the code and the data set, and put a citation CFF in the directories for both the code and the data set if they're in different directories. But I think that that's not something that's currently supported by GitHub, for example. So some people will miss that information perhaps.
Okay, we have 2 hands raised. I don't know which one of you have raised your hand first, Alejandra and Daniel. So whichever one of you raised your hand first, please go ahead.
I don't know, but my comment was a little also a follow-up of this discussion. So unless Alejandra, I mean, if Alejandra is okay, I would like to go first.
Okay,
Are you okay with that, Alejandra?
So my point is related to the discussion that was happening right now. So
Okay, then go ahead.
okay. So I mean, in terms, as you mentioned, data, and so Moritz presented some interesting use cases, first on reproducibility, but then also on terms of the data citation and using CFF. I mean, my comment on that could be that perhaps, I mean, needs a broader discussion because there are already formats for data citation. So, I mean, CFF, it's a great addition. And I think, I mean, all of the integrations are, it's fantastic, all of that progress and seeing that in practice and helping promoting software citation. But in terms of data citation, there are systems like, well, the data cite schema that supports that. There is the DCAT W3C format that supports data description. Indeed, there is also, as you mentioned, Google Dataset Search. There is schema.org dataset description. So in that sense, I think it's, I mean, if there is something to be gained from the CSF in that format and you've extended it to support other types, that's great, but there is already a lot of work on that area. And even in terms of the reproducibility and linking software and data, I think that's, of course, a use case I'm interested in. And there are as well already some vocabularies and schemas to do this. So whatever integration and use case, it would be great to discuss in the broader community, so other approaches are also considered and things are not done in isolation and repeating things that may exist. So
yes,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And this is one of the reasons why we were cautious we were thinking hard if we wanted to support this. And that was a feature that was just brought to us from the GitHub side of things. And it's also not something I can see well, I think in the future, if people describe their data sets in CFF, it'll only be data sets that reside on GitHub, which is perhaps not even the best place to have your data set. So I can really only see this as taking a very, very small piece of the cake in terms of how to describe your data sets. But I absolutely agree. If there is scope for extending that and for CFF, we'll definitely go into conversation with other formats and other standards, because I am not very familiar with all the standards out there, and I wouldn't dare to just stand there and say, so CFF now supports data sets, and that's something you should use. Definitely,
Okay.
I absolutely
Thank
agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Sure. It was following up also this discussion, and I think, for example, in the use case that Moritz was bringing on, it's quite interesting because for a long time there has been another community, which is the research object community, where we have been working on actually trying to describe the links between all these resources, because it may not be only one software or one data set that you're linking, right? It's the full context of a research experiment. You may have workflows, you may have additional things. And it is true, though, that while we have worked on how this is all described together as a research object and there is another community for fair digital objects and so on, it is true that how these resources are cited has not been fully addressed. And I think this is a point of not of improvement, but a point for discussion for CFF, where it may be adopted for being extended for these additional resources. So I think, I think that this is a great opportunity to accomplish that as well. As Alejandra said, there are many things to describe, many vocabularies to describe the resources themselves, but citation itself, it's another thing, right?
Yes.
So I think there is a good opportunity there.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So I think historically, the citation file format has concentrated on the credit use case for citation mostly, but I'm really interested in making it, improve it to support the reproducibility use case better, and also, you know, describing links to other objects. And so I think the references section is a start, but it's a humble start, and it certainly needs a lot of improvement to be able to cover at least a portion of these issues that I'll be happy to discuss anything that will help improve the format in the future regarding reproducibility and linking to other objects.
Okay, happy to be part of that discussion. And I have another question as well regarding technical aspect. So you have mentioned a lot GitHub, right? But there are also other repositories such as GitLab, Bitbucket. So are you planning on doing some integrations there as well?
So the good thing about GitHub is that they came to us for adding support, which is great. And I know that there is an open issue for adding support to GitLab, and I'll try to find it while we talk, which might not be easy. But yes, I think it'd be great if that spread over to GitHub and to other repositories like Bitbucket as well, because especially in Germany, I know that lots of universities and research labs use their own GitLab instances. So if that's something that would come to GitLab as well, I think it'd help these communities in getting better citation support as well, definitely.
All right. And well, if there are no more other questions, just the last one very quickly. Can you describe a little bit more how was the interaction with GitHub? So you mentioned that they came to you, right? So how was the process?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting part of the whole thing. So I think originally Arfon Smith, who is part of the Force 11 software citation implementation working group, it's quite a mouthful. He came to a number of people from that working group, namely Martin Fenner, Dan Katz, Neil Chu-Hong. I think, I'm not sure if Moran was part of this discussion, may have been. And at some point, Dan brought me in as a representative for CFF. And I think that in the end, it was GitHub's decision whether to go with CodeMeter and CFF. And there were some issues with the scope of the different formats. And I think they chose to go with CFF because it really focuses on citation only. And that's something they wanted to support. And I think they also felt that it may be a bit more user-friendly in terms of catering to users that aren't used to writing JSON LD or using the tools that are out there and just want, you know, something, a code snippet to copy and paste and then adapt to their needs. So I think that was the process. And then we worked with Arfon, and we is myself, Jurian Sparks, and also Rob Haynes, who develops the Ruby CFF gem mostly, and we had input and I think a private beta going out to members of the working group as well, who provided feedback, and that was also included in that. So that was the whole process in short.
Okay, we have another raised hand. Moran has questions. Sorry, Daniel, but we need.
No, I just wanted to say thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Stephan, for this presentation and for the work you're doing with CFF. I think it's a very good idea to keep CFF on citation on the credit use case, and I hear those voices, and you're correct that there are other use cases that metadata should handle, but I'm not sure that the CFF format is adapted to those use cases, and having metadata with other formats is also a solution. So for my questions here, I've put it some of in the chat, but maybe for other people that don't look at the chat. The first question was about the BibTeX, because the GitHub integration has provided a BibTeX export with type MISC. So do you know why? So I see that Tom has answered me on the chat, but if you can say a few words about that, the choice of the MISC instead of the software type.
Yes, so I think that that's something that came from GitHub, and it's definitely still all a bit of work in progress because the CEO of GitHub announced the feature a bit prematurely. So more or less 2 or 3 weeks before we were actually ready. We wanted to have the new version out before that, but these things happen. So it's still iterating to get better every couple of days, I think. And I think the plan is to support the add software alias for MISC at some point. Whenever you see a type software citation.cff in your repo. But I'm not sure what the heuristics for picking the type of BibTeX are in the background on the GitHub side. That's not something we see. Yeah.
Is Arfan behind the development of the feature, or is there another members of the GitHub team? Do you not know? Maybe you don't know.
I know that Arfan had a team at a site to work on this very briefly, and that it's now being transferred to another team for long-term support.
Okay.
To be honest, I'm not sure what I can spill the beans on in terms of what's going on inside GitHub.
So my second question, sorry, Alice, just a quick one for the governance. What would be the idea for governing over this citation file format now that it's kind of more public and will be more used with the GitHub integration? Yeah,
so there are two things, I think. One thing is general. I think I would like personally to have a better general governance thing in place, something like a steering committee with some members of the CFF community, but also perhaps some members coming from the Forest 11 community and the software citation community in general. I think that would be really helpful to have. And the case for the steering committee to step in would be to make decisions in terms of the scope of CFF, I think, but also if so I think one fairly minimal model for governance for open source projects such as this, which I have no experience in, is something that also GitHub proposed a couple of weeks back, in that they say the maintainers of the single repositories should basically govern their own repositories, but if there is any conflict or if there's something that needs to be taken someplace else to be discussed, then the steering committee would be that place. That's one thing. The other thing is that that's something that Yo Yehudi from the Wellcome Trust, I think she works at. She is currently running a research project in which CFF takes part as well as a repository, looking at things like the code of conduct. And she sent out a tweet a couple of days or weeks ago saying that she found that a number of repositories in her corpus had codes of conduct and also listed a contact, but it would only go to a single person. So in the case of CFF, if you contact someone in terms of a code of conduct issue, then that email would go to me and to me only. And that doesn't make any sense because if the person had an issue with myself, then, that's not very useful. So the steering committee should also be used to generate a code of conduct committee, I think, to take care of the issues in a much more professional way.
Excellent, thanks, Stephan. Just on this topic, and last question, promise. Have you considered conducting code? In CodeMeta, we are also trying to form governance of the code meta vocabulary. Have you thought of kind of converging into something that governs both vocabularies, or keep it separate?
Interesting. I didn't know about that, but I'm in touch with Martin Fenner, and yeah, I mean that's definitely something we should talk about. Perhaps it makes sense to combine the two. yeah, so we can also get the balance right.
I totally agree. Thank you, Stephan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alice.
That sounds great to me too. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording now, if that's okay.